By 1969, more than 40,000 American soldiers had been killed in Vietnam. At the very same time, tens of thousands of young Americans their age were dropping out of school, burning their draft cards and vanishing into the world of psychedelics. To understand this, we have to look at history. In the 1950s in the United States particularly, families with enough money flocked to the suburbs, where mass-produced houses, shopping malls, and highways created a standardized way of life. The idea of the American dream was still alive, which promised a house, a car, and a steady job. But for many young people coming of age in the early 1960s, this dream wasn't enough. If only they knew what Americans would have to deal with only 50 years later. At first, the war between the Democratic South and the Communist North in Vietnam was sold as a battle to stop the North, the Communists, from spreading. But as the war escalated, televisions brought graphic images into American living rooms. Helicopters were evacuating wounded soldiers, villages were being burned to the ground, and body bags were being unloaded from planes, which made the war impossible to ignore. Change is a constant in the world, especially when there is a need for it. It is just that when you have such a need for change, some solutions can and will be dubious, like the hippies. Now, although I could go into the horrors of the war, the atrocities committed on both sides, the government's aims, the draft, etc., I want to really go into the dichotomy between the hippies and the soldiers. How it felt like a slap in the face, not only from the hippies, but also from the government. The men who were forced to fight shall be remembered forever, and it shall be known that all of this was preventable. No one should have died, and no matter how many apologies are issued, it is never enough. All we can do now is honor them and learn from history. In this video, I'll focus on what causes such a different group of people. How could the hippies ever exist? The hippies were very similar in age to the men going to war, who were old enough to fight but not old enough to vote for or against the people who were sending them to fight, which is another topic in and of itself. Amidst the chaos, the hippie movement grew to shocking numbers. It was centered in places like San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district and attracted thousands of young people searching for an alternative way of life, an easier one. Nowadays, it's more people in their homes full of crystals, candles, and bracelets trying to convince others of the lifestyle or to buy their stuff. But that's another topic. In modern society, outliers can exist, and they do. But the trouble is that not everyone can live in a certain way. For a person to be able to live, let's say, a hippie lifestyle, there need to be multiple others keeping society together. As of 2025, there are around 8.1 billion people. Not everyone can live like that. Hippies had to live somehow, and I guarantee you it wasn't by hunting and farming alone. Someone was funding and probably profiting off the movement, usually the leaders of the communes, or the weed and psychedelic producers, which could also be leaders, you never know. With that going on, how could soldiers not question their motives, their reason for war? The movement was seen as repulsive. These people fornicated and smoked weed all day, while their brothers were dying in a war. The notion of that is disturbing, and so was the war. So is the war, actually. Was it worth American lives? No. Imagine telling the mothers of the dead why their kids came home in a body bag. You can't. There was no reason for that to happen, and there never will be. So when the news broadcasts showed images of long-haired kids in San Francisco dancing barefoot in the streets, experimenting with drugs and proclaiming "make love not war," veterans would later admit that they felt like they had been fighting and bleeding for a country that had already given up on them. To add fuel to the flames, I even heard of hippies spitting on veterans, which is just purely despicable. It doesn't matter if you're for or against the war. Actions like that just cannot be tolerated. Imagine how these soldiers felt in Vietnam if that information ever reached them. Hate the war or the government that caused it, but never the boys who were sent to fight and die. I hope you can see that the hippie movement goes far beyond what the hippies actually did. It's about the circumstances that created the movement. The Pentagon Papers, leaked in 1971, reflected years of policy, and in it revealed that the government knew the war could not be won, in a sense, even as they sent more troops into combat. And throughout years of schooling, I've never heard about it. Some humans can go to bed at night and look themselves in the mirror, sending other humans to die for their own gain. And for all Americans, for the entire world, this is unforgivable and shall never be forgotten. The circumstances that force people to change can lead to strange outcomes, which we have seen with the hippies. The danger of such radical change is, even though sometimes it is necessary, when it rejects social structures without offering anything stable in return, it can lead to other problems. The hippies were not alone. Their rebellion overlapped with several other powerful movements that reflected the unrest at the time. The civil rights movement had already shaken America, and the Black Panthers demanded radical change. While protests were often necessary for the well-being of oppressed and general people, they follow the very human pattern of violence, deepening polarization and fueling unrest. Even within the anti-war movement, there were divisions. Some embraced nonviolence, holding flowers in front of National Guard rifles, while others, like the Weather Underground, turned to bombings of government buildings. The hippie ideal of peace and love coexisted usually with riots, assassinations, and burning cities. Were they responsible? No, but it shows that other groups also demanded change and were willing to do insane things to get it, reflecting a deeply disturbing human pattern in behavior. These movements weren't limited to America. The hippie trail was a popular overland route in the 1960s and 1970s, taken by Western travelers from all around. Starting in Europe, Westerners passed through beautiful and religious nations. It went through many countries and looked approximately like this. Common destinations were Turkey, with its mountains and Mediterranean coast, Lebanon with its valleys, Jordan with desert landscapes, Iran with vast plateaus, and Afghanistan with striking highlands and remote passes. Travelers then continued eastwards to Pakistan with the towering Himalayas, India with its own mountains, and Bangladesh with lush deltas and waterways. Some extended their journey further to Nepal with its insanely high summits, or Thailand to the temples. Nowadays, this sounds less insane, but in the 1960s and 70s, this was a big deal. Even getting there was difficult, so these people reflected exploration and change at the time, far beyond what had been done before. All the murders, riots, and political violence at the time must never be forgotten. But like all history, it shows us how millions of people thought and lived. It tells us about both sides of a story, about the human race, about how some of us can be under certain conditions. The hippies reflected a generational pushback against the Vietnam War, racial segregation, and conformity. Psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers describe this shift as part of a search for self-actualization and authenticity. Even if your current state is not how you actually are as a human, it's a step in getting there. The hippies experimented and learned what they liked and didn't like, were very often manipulated and taken advantage of because of the manipulation, which, yet again, like all history and like I've been saying for countless videos, shows us about the human condition, about human behavior, which is part of the reason why history is so important. The spread of psychedelic drugs was not only recreational but tied to genuine attempts to explore consciousness. Even the government got involved with projects like the Gateway Process and, sadly, MKUltra, which will be talked about in a future video. The decade in America revealed how people, when confronted with rapid change, split their responses. By the early 1970s, the movement would begin to fade, but the music festivals, alternative lifestyles, environmental awareness, and suspicion of government power remain deeply ingrained in Western culture and is still seen today. But other aspects are thankfully gone.